Hey kids, Pastor Brian's back, and we're outside because it's such a beautiful day. Had a few rainy days, but now it's looking like it's going to be really nice. Hopefully, you can get outside today and burn off some of that energy. We're going to continue on in our story. It got pretty exciting in that last few chapters, so we're going to continue on. Little Christian thinks he's found his friend Faithful, so let's find out if that's true and what happens. We're in chapter 22. Little Christian overtakes Faithful. Little Christian had no rest that night. He did not dare to lie down and sleep in the dark valley, for he feared lest the wicked soldiers, whom he could hear passing up and down the rocks, would find him and put him to death or carry him back to the city of destruction. So he was very tired, but he walked bravely on through the mist and the darkness, praying in his heart that the king would watch over him. And after a time he thought of some words that he had read in the king's book. He shall give his angels charge over thee. Then he remembered the picture that Charity loved so much and the little child with the guardian angel. The picture was true, he said to himself. The little child was walking on a path like this, and the king's angels would take care of him. Perhaps there is an angel with me now. I am sure you know that little Christian was quite right. The angel had been with him through all the dreadful night. And although little Pilgrim could not see his bright guardian, there were gentle hands spread out to shield him from the terrors of the way, and strong arms ready to hold him fast if his feet slipped on the dangerous path. At last the mist began to roll away, and a soft pale light shone overhead. Little Christian looked up and found that he could see a strip of sky between the overhanging rocks, and he knew that the day was breaking. As the sun rose and its glorious rays streamed into the dark valley, he stood still and looked behind him. The black rocks that surrounded him and the narrow tracks with the treacherous marsh on one side and the steep precipice on the other seemed more fearful than they had been in the darkness. Little Christian wondered how he had ever come safely through this dreadful place. Then he looked forward and felt more and more thankful that the sun had risen, for he saw that the rest of the path was strewn with snares and nets, which the wicked soldiers had laid there to hinder and hurt the king's pilgrims. They had also dug holes in dangerous places and had done everything they could do to make the road difficult and unsafe, so that Christian thought, if he had passed over it in the darkness, I should very likely have fallen and crippled myself. At the end of the dark valley, there was a large cave in the side of the mountain, and in this cave 2 very powerful giants had once lived. Whenever pilgrims passed by their dwelling, the giants would attack them and try to kill them. For a long time, this was one of the most dangerous places on the way to the celestial city. But one of the giants died, and the other grew old, and his limbs became stiff, so he could no longer rush upon the pilgrims. When little Christian came into the cave, he saw the old giant sitting outside it. He felt a little frightened, but the giant did not move, so he walked straight on. The giant was full of rage when he saw him, and would have liked to have seized the boy and drag him into his cave, but he had no strength left, and little Christian passed on safely. The dark valley with all its terrors now lay behind him, and just before him the ground rose a little. Christian climbed upon the path, and when he reached the top of the ascent, he found that he could see for some distance along the road. Not very far from him, a boy was walking with his face toward the king's city. He was wearing a white suit like Christian's own, but had no armor. It must be Faithful, thought Christian, and he cried out, "Wait for me, and I will walk with you." Then Faithful looked around, and Christian cried again, "Wait till I can overtake you." And Faithful answered, "I am going to the king, and there are enemies behind me." When Christian saw that Faithful would not wait for him, he felt vexed, and began to run as fast as he could. He soon caught Faithful, and instead of stepping by his side, he ran on further, so that Faithful, in turn, might be left behind. But he forgot to look where he was going, and striking his foot against a stone, he fell to the ground, and Faithful had to hurry after him and help him get up. Chapter 23. Faithful tells the story of his pilgrimage. The two boys were very pleased to see each other, for they had been friends when they were living in the city of destruction. Faithful had always been quiet and thoughtful, and he and little Christian had sometimes talked together about the king's book and the wonderful stories that the strangers had told them. "I am glad I have caught up with you," said Christian. "It would be very much nicer to travel together." "I meant to come all the way with you," replied Faithful, "but you went off so suddenly that I did not know until you were gone." "How long did you stay in the city?" "Only 2 or 3 days. After you left, the boys talked a great deal about the king's message, but I don't think they really believed them." What did they say to Pliable?" "Oh, they soon found out where he had been, for he was covered all over with mud, and when he came back they laughed at him and would not play with him." They need not laugh at him," said little Christian. They would not come." "No, but they teased him from turning back at the first bit of trouble he came to. I met him the day after, and he was going to ask him about you, but he crossed over the street and pretended he didn't see me." "I'm very sorry," said Christian. "I thought he would have been a real pilgrim, but it was a pity to see that he went home again. Now tell me all that has happened to you." "I did not fall into the slough," said Faithful, "but I met a girl named Pleasure before I came to the wicket gate. She is a servant of the wicked prince's palace, and when she saw where I was going, she tried to make me go back with her. I was afraid she would make me, for she was tall and strong, but I would not listen to what she said, and at last she told me I was a stupid boy and not worth speaking to." Little Christian remembered how he had turned aside when worldly deceived him, and he had said, You may be very glad you did not listen to her. "Did you meet anyone else?" "Not for some time. When I came to the Hill of Difficulty, I saw an old man sitting by the side of the road. He asked me whether I was going to the Celestial City, and I said I had much better come and live with him, for he would be good to me, and when he died, I should have all his riches. He was so pleasant that I could not help listening to him, and he almost persuaded me to go with him." "Oh," cried little Christian, "he would have taken you to the wicked prince." "Yes, I am sure he would have. I was just ready to turn back, but I looked up and saw that he was smiling to himself. And when it came to my mind that perhaps he was one of the wicked prince's servants, so I said, I will not go. Then he was very angry and told me he would send someone after me to hurt me. However, I escaped him and went up the hill." "Did he send anyone?" asked Christian. "Yes, just when I was passing the little arbor, I heard someone coming quickly behind me. It was one of the king's servants, and he said he had come to punish me for listening to the old man. His name was Justice, and I thought he would have killed me with his rod, but a man came by with a gentle face, and he told Justice not to strike me again. I did not know who it was at first, but when he was going up the hill, I saw the marks on his feet, and I'm sure it must have been our dear prince himself." "I have heard about Justice," said Christian, "but the prince did not let him punish the pilgrims too much. Did you see the palace at the top of the hill?" "Yes, and the lions too. They were asleep." I've lost my place. "They were asleep, and it was quite early, so I thought it was better to go on my way. The porter told me he had seen you. I wish you had stayed at the palace. The people are so kind. Did you meet anyone in the valley?" "I met Discontent there, and he was very tiresome indeed." "You did not meet Self?" "No, I did," said Christian, "and he very nearly killed me." Chapter 24, Talkative. The boys went on talking happily together until they came to a part of the plain in which the way of the king was wider than usual. Faithful happened to turn his head, and he saw that another boy was walking on the opposite side of the road. It was a fine-looking lad, and Faithful thought he might be a pleasant companion, and he said, "Are you going to the Celestial City?" The boy answered, "Yes." "Then let us walk together," said Faithful. "We are all traveling the same way." "I shall like that very much," replied the boy, and he crossed over the road and began to talk with Faithful. He had a great deal to say about the king and his servants and his laws, and Little Faithful felt quite pleased to think of having a new friend who was so good and clever. Presently he waited for Christian, who was walking a little ways behind him, and whispered, "Is he not a nice boy? I am sure that he will be a very good pilgrim." Little Christian smiled. "Don't you know who he is?" he asked. "No," said Faithful. "I've never seen him before." "Haven't you? Why, he lives in our city. His name is Talkative. He only pretends to be a pilgrim, just to amuse himself. But I did not know that he had ever came as far as this." "Is he a bad pilgrim, then?" "I'm afraid he does not love the king," said Christian, "but you will soon find out." Then Faithful ran on again and walked by the side of Talkative. Perhaps, thought the little pilgrim, he may be quite so bad as Christian thinks, and we may be able to persuade him to go with us. But the boy talked, and the less faithful liked him. And the more the boy talked, the less Faithful liked him. And at last he became quite sure that they could never be friends. It was plain that Talkative was very vain and foolish, and although he praised the king and said how delightful it was to be a servant, Faithful could see that he had no real wish to enter the celestial city, and that he himself was only pretending to be a pilgrim for the sake of amusing himself. Faithful listened quietly for some time while his companion talked about the king's goodness, and then he said, "I suppose you are very careful to obey all the king's laws." Talkative blushed, for he knew he always did just what he liked, although he was very ready to tell his friends that the king had commanded them to do what the king had commanded them to do. He felt vexed with Little Faithful for asking him such a question, and answered crossly, "I don't see that it matters to you." "I think it does matter," replied Faithful. "If you talk so much about loving the king, you ought to serve him very well indeed." "How do you know that I don't serve him?" returned Talkative. I'm not sure, said Faithful, "but I am afraid you don't. I wonder what a little fellow like you has to do with correcting me," cried Talkative in an angry tone. "I am very much older than you. I didn't mean to correct you at all, but I was not sure if you were a real pilgrim." "A real pilgrim? Of course I am. I know exactly how it is. Christian told you a lot of stories about me when you ran back to speak with him, and I suppose you believe them all." Faithful did not know what to say, for he could see that Talkative was very angry indeed, so he walked on quietly without speaking. "I don't care at all," said Talkative. "If you chose to believe bad things about me, it's your fault, not mine. But I think you are very rude, disagreeable little boy, and I do not wish to talk to you any more. You can just walk by yourself and leave me to do as I like." He seemed so angry that Faithful made no answer. He let him go on his way and waited for Christian, who soon came upon him. "Never mind," said Christian, when he heard what had happened. "I am glad he has not stayed with us, for I do not think he would have done us any good." You know, what a good reminder these chapters are, that and when we walk through the journey of our Christian faith, we need good companions to walk with us. We need good friends that will encourage us and help us in our walk. There are some people that will act like they are being helpful, but really they're only looking out for themselves. But we need those good believers, those boys and girls, and those friends that will encourage us. If you have friends that are encouraging you to the Lord, to walk in the Lord's way, then keep those people around. If you have other friends that are telling you to do bad things or to walk away contrary to what God's word says, then those are friends that we don't need in our lives, and we need to try to be nice to them and share the Bible with them and share God's word with them, but they don't need to have influence in our lives. So what a good reminder these chapters are. So I hope you're encouraged by this, and you'll continue to journey with me, and we'll see next week what happens. We'll see next time what happens to Little Christian. Thanks. Have a great day.